Shalom, 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 shalom. I want to give our honor and glory to Yahweh. Bashim Yahushua, brother y'all, with the servants. Back at again. Another Truth Revealing Tuesday, Truth Revealing Tuesday, going into the fourth beast, right? The fourth beast in the Greco-Roman Wars, right? The fourth beast in the Greco-Roman Wars, right? I don't got my partner today, you know what I'm saying? But we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. And we got a beautiful class through the Spirit, Lord willing. So, Lord willing, right? So let's start off with this right quick. Let's try to 77 verse 5. Let's start off with that. All right. The book of Psalms, chapter 77, verse 5, it says, I have considered the days of old, right? The years of ancient times. So you got to consider the days of old. You got to consider our past. You got to consider where we came from, right? You got to consider our culture. Because see, when you think about it, the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, right? We don't know too much about our past. We don't know too much about where we come from, but the Bible, which is our heritage, tells you what our culture is and where we come from. And not only does it tell our culture and where we come from, it also reveals you prophecy as well, future events that's going to happen, right? Also, it has riddles. It has different kind of dark sayings and parables and things like that. And so one of the parables not parables, but one of the dreams or visions that we're going to go into, right, is going to be that Daniel had, right, and as if you've been paying attention to the lessons that we had prior to, right, we went into the first beast, right. We was going into Daniel chapter 2, right, and Daniel chapter 7, and we was cross-referencing those kingdoms according to the beast in Daniel chapter 7, right? So we went over the Babylonian Empire, right? We went over the Persian and the Medo and Persian Empire. We went through over the Grecian Empire, right? So now we're going into the fourth beast, right? Going into actually the Roman Empire. But before we go into the Roman Empire, Roman Empire came into power, how they came into power. Okay, so first go to Daniel chapter 2. Let's go to Daniel chapter 2. And as you can see, the title right here. Again, we covered, right, the in the statue, right? I'm gonna pull this up real fast. Pull this up. All right, do this real fast. I'm gonna show y'all this real fast. So this is what we covered right here. Right, we covered this. We covered the top two, right? Right, the Babylonian Empire, right? The gold, the head of gold, Salakia. We covered the head of gold, right? The Babylonian Empire, we covered that, right? We covered the Medo-Persian Empire, right? And then we cover also the Greco, right? The Grecian Empire, right? The Macedonian Kingdom, right? The left of the fourth beast, right? The fourth beast, or the fourth part, right, going into the legs of iron empire. That's what we about to get into, right? That's what we about to get into. So I kind of got a visual, right, of the statue, right, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? And then it also goes into what Daniel was talking about in Daniel chapter 7, right? So, with that being said, let's stop sharing that. Now let's go to Daniel chapter 2. As I was at Daniel chapter 2, right? Daniel chapter 2, right? It says, the fourth king in the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, right? For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. So when you go into this and you think about this, each level, right? Each level of metal that it was going into, like the gold, right? Gold, the brass. I mean the gold. Hold on, let's go back to it. so y'all can see the visual. So I can show y'all, right? Hold on, let me get it right quick. Right. So you got the gold, pure gold. Hold on, let me see this. Let me share my screen, show y'all this. Right. So pure gold it's softer than silver, right? Each metal as you go down is harder than the next, right? It's strong gold, pure gold is soft, right? If you didn't know, pure gold is soft, right? Silver is stronger than gold, right? Brass is stronger than silver, right? Now we at the iron, and the iron, because when we think about it, right? The Medo-Persian took over the Babylonian Empire, right? The Grecians took over. Now we're going to go into the Romans taking over the Grecian Empire. That's what we're going to go into. So let's put an end to that. Stop sharing that. All right. Now let's go to the book of Daniel, chapter 2. Right. Book of Daniel, chapter 2. So Daniel chapter 2, right? And it reads this. So like yeah. And it says this. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, and for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as the iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. So it's going into that's going into the Roman Empire, going and conquering, defeating all these different nations, right? Particularly the Greeks, right? So let's go. Let's say, and whereas thou sawest the feet in the toe. All right, we're gonna start right there. So let's start right there. I did want to bring this out, this right here to show y'all too as well. Right? It says, yes, iron, especially steel, is generally stronger and harder than bronze. Right? I kind of want to just kind of bring it out so y'all can see the symbolism in the in this dream. Right? So I just kind of want to share that as well. Okay, so now let's go to this, the Greco-Roman Wars, right? The Greco-Roman Wars. So you had four significant points, four significant key points, right? You got the pirate war, right? The Macedonian Wars, right? The Achaean War, right? Which be the battle at Corinth, right? And then you got the War of Actium, right? We're going to touch on these different key points, right, in history, right? So it says this. Now we're going to the first one, right? Is we're going to go into the pirate war, right? We're going to the pirate war and how that and kicking off that, right? So it says this. It says the pirate war 281 to 275 BC was a conflict fought by Pyrrhus and Epirus and his allies against the Roman Republic, right? Supported by its allies in Carthage, right? And so we're gonna get a let me see if I can bring that side. Yeah, I'm bringing that. I don't know if I could all right, let me see. I don't know why it keep. All right, let's do that. So these are the different areas that it was fighting in, right? This is if y'all can see this, these are the different areas that they was fighting in, right? See Rome right there, right? You got Rome, you got all these different things. These are the different fights and battles they had going on in the pirate wars, right? The pirate wars. These are the different places, right? So let's stop sharing that and let's get back to the reading that we was on. All right, let's get back to the reading that we was on. You gotta go back and do it every time. Okay. So it says this. It says back it says Carthage, right? It says fought mainly in Magna Graecia in Sicilia. Pyrrhus first intervened at the invitation of the Italic Greeks against Roman expansion. Right. However, his aims in the war became oriented towards establishing hegemony over southern Italy and Sicily, initially meeting some success. His aims were left unfulfilled after his campaign in Sicily stalemated against Carthaginian resistance, and Rome forced his withdrawal from Italy in 275 BC. Right, the first major conflict involving Rome, one of the Hellenistic powers. Right, one of the Hellenistic powers. So this going into this part, this portion of Rome, right? So now before now let's keep going. It says this. It says prior to the war, the Romans had expanded for some decades in southern Italy, defeating most notable the Samnites. They also started to conclude alliances with Greek city-states and Magna Graecia, right? The outbreak of new conflict between one of those allies, Thurii, and Samnite-led alliance led to Roman intervention, right? So now we're going into the Roman Republic. We're going into the Roman Republic and their rise, right? They're trying them trying to expand their empire. Okay. So it says this. Let's kind of jump down, right? Let's jump down. It says Pyrrhus advanced north, defeating the Romans at Heraclea and Lucania and causing some Roman allies to defect. He advanced quickly to Latium with interest in supporting the Etruscans against Rome. However, after the Romans concluded victory over Etruria, Pyrrhus withdrew from Latium for winter quarters. Over the winter, the Romans refused negotiations for a peace and re-engaged Pyrrhus at Asculum 279 BC, where the Romans were again defeated. Right? So now they were constantly being defeated. Right? So let's keep going. Let's jump down. Right? So it says, successful on much of the island, Pyrrhus was, however, unable to take the Carthaginian stronghold of Lilybaeum due to the weakness at sea. With renewed Roman aggression in southern Italy between 279 and 276 BC, and dwindling support among the Sicilians due to the cost of war, Pyrrhus heeded a renewed Tarentine call for aid and returned to southern Italy with some losses in early 276. Right? In 275 BC, he engaged the Romans again at Beneventum, where he was defeated or stalemated. So now we have this point where you had the pirates and then was going back and forth. The pirates was going back and forth with the Romans, but at this time he was defeated, right, in 275 BC, right, forcing him on the defensive. With the campaign unwinnable, Pyrrhus withdrew to Epirus in the winter of 275 to 74, leaving a small garrison in Tarentum, while Pyrrhus' intervention had revitalized the cause of the Samnites, the Lucanians, and the Brutans, and Italian Greeks against Rome. So you had Italian Greeks at this time that were pitted against Rome, right? So it says, I'm going to jump down. It says this: Roman prestige on the pan-Mediterranean stage was greatly enhanced, and its status was a dominant power on the peninsula. Italy would only again be challenged at the end of the century during the Hannibalic War. Right now, that's going. They speaking jumping ahead, but we not finna jump that far ahead, right? So this is kind of kicking off. So one of the key points, right, in the rise of the Romans was the victory over Pyrrhus, right? So let's keep going. As we get to it, says the Macedonian Wars. So now we get into we get into diving into the Macedonian Wars, and you know one of the descendants of the Macedonian was your boy Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Great. So let's go into it. So we're gonna get into this thing. All right. So the first Macedonian War, right, 214 or 205 BC. Let's go. Right. It says this. The first Macedonian War, right, was fought by Rome allied after 211 BC with the Aetolian League in Attalus, one of Pergamum, against Philip the Macedon. Right? Philip the Macedon. Remember this. Right? Philip the Macedon. It says contemporaneously with the Second Punic War, right, 218 to 201 BC, against Carthage, right, against Carthage. And this is the reason of Carthage right here. It's in North Africa, right? Carthage is in North Africa. So it says there was no decisive engagements, and the war ended in a stalemate. During the war, Macedon attempted to gain control over parts of Illyria, but without success. It is commonly thought that these skirmishes in the east prevented Macedon from aiding the Carthaginian general Hannibal in the war with Rome. The Peace of Phoenix, right, in 205 BC formally ended the war. So you had all these different people involved in this thing, right? And there again, you have the Romans at war with the Macedonians, right? Now the Macedonians in the war and the Romans was going to be going there. They have several wars they was getting into, right? So we're gonna jump down, and we're gonna jump down. We're gonna read some of these things, and we're gonna jump down because we're not gonna read the whole thing, but just to kind of get you a backdrop of who played a part in the different wars that played a part in the rise of the Romans, right? Because they didn't come one day, they just woke up and they was in power. No, they had to defeat some people, right? They had to get into some war, right? They had to be victorious. So we're going into different things. All right, so we're gonna jump down. So it says, for Greece is already entire. Oh, hold on. I'm gonna read this right there. Involved in the war with the Aetolians, Philip learned of the victory of Hannibal over the Romans. So you got Philip hearing about the Hannibal getting a victory over the Romans, right? It says at Lake Trasimene in June 217 BC, Philip at first showed a letter only to Demetrius, perhaps seeing a chance to recover his kingdom. Demetrius immediately advised the young king to make peace with the Aetolians, to turn his attentions toward Illyria. In Italy, Polybius quotes Demetrius saying, for Greece is already entirely obedient to you and remains so. The Achaeans from genuine affection, the Aetolians from the terror which their disasters in the present war have inspired them. Italy, in your crossing into it, is the first step in the acquirement of universal power. So he's on the game to try to get universal power, to which no one has a better claim than yourself. And now is the moment to act when the Romans have suffered a reverse. Right, so you had a lot of people trying to gain power at this time, and not just power in one area. They was trying to gain power everywhere, universal power. Okay, it says this, and Philip at once began negotiations with the Antiochians at a conference at a coast near Naupactus. Philip met the Antiochian leaders, and a peace treaty was concluded. Polybius quotes the Antiochian Aglis in Naupactus as giving the following speech. Now I ain't gonna go and read the whole speech, but that's a whole thing. But they going into let's matter of fact, I'm gonna jump down. I'm gonna jump down. Says, but I entreat of you to postpone your controversies of wars with the Greeks at the time of greater tranquility, and to make it your supreme aim to retain the power of making peace or war with them at your own will. For if once you allow the clouds now gathering in the west to settle upon Greece, I fear exceedingly that the power of making peace or war, and in a word, all these games which are now playing against each other, will be so completely knocked out of the hands of us all, that we shall be praying heaven to grant us only this power of making war or peace with each other at our own will and pleasure, and of settling our own disputes. So you have all these different things going on, and this is Philip talking, and he's trying to build a relationship right with the Antiochians, right? So let's kind of jump down. So now it briefly touches on right. Philip builds his fleet. So now Philip, he's gaining power. Philip is now at this point gaining power. Right, he's building his fleet up. Right, he's getting the army prepared. All right. So let's jump down here. At the beginning of summer, Philip and his fleet left Macedon, sailed through the Iapygus Strait between the island of Euboea and Boeotia on the Greek mainland, then rounded Cape Malea before dropping anchor off the islands of Cephalenia and Leucas to await word of the location of the Roman fleet. Informed that it was still at Lilybaeum, he sailed north to Apollonia in Illyria, right? However, as the Macedonian fleet neared the island of Sazan, Philip heard the report of some Roman quinqueremes had been seen headed to Apollonia. Convinced that the entire Roman fleet was sailing to apprehend him, Philip ordered an immediate return to Cephalenia. Polybius speaks of panic and disorder to describe the fleet's hasty retreat, and says that in fact the Romans had sent only a squadron of 10 ships, that because of an inconsiderate alarm. So you got all these different things going on. You got Philip, he's going back and forth. He's trying to attack the Romans, then he retreating from the Romans. So you got all these different things going on, right? So now you got Philip allies with Carthage, right? Then you got war breaks out in Illyria. This is around 214. So we're gonna fast forward, trying to just get a brief synopsis of the different things that was going on during that time. So with that being said, we're gonna fast forward and we're gonna go to the next key point. All right, because it's a lot we gotta go into. So you got the first Macedonian War, then you got the second Macedonian War. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna jump to the second Macedonian. And it's, you see by the title, it says, during which the Romans declared the freedom of Greece from the king of Macedon. Right? So let's go ahead and jump to this. Let's get into it. The Second Macedonian War, which was 200 to 197 BC, was fought between Macedon, led by Philip, right? Macedon, again, same dude, in Rome, allied with Pergamon, Rhodes, and the Aegean League, right? Philip was defeated and was forced to abandon all possessions in southern Greece, Thrace, and Asia Minor. During their intervention, although the Romans declared the freedom of the Greeks against the rule of the Macedonian kingdom, and when you look at the Macedonian kingdom, you gotta think about, this is the time before Alexander the Great came into power, right? This is before Alexander the Great came into power, because you gotta think Alexander, he got his kingdom mostly built off the back of his father, right? Which name was Philip as well, right? So hold on. Let's go to this right quick. Right. So hold on. Let's wait. Let's go back to this. Not trying to get this. This is not what I'm looking for. Salakia. There we go. All right. So let's keep going. So let's jump down. So it's gonna start to mention Alexander the Great. So it says the background. In 204 BC, King Ptolemy, right, Philopator of Egypt died, leaving the throne to his 6-year-old son Ptolemy, right, Philip of Macedon, and Antiochus the Great, right? Not Alexander, but it's gonna reach him Antiochus. So, and all this what we're going into is gonna play a part as well, right? So it says, let's keep reading. Now it's mentioned Antiochus the Great. So when you think about it right here, this around the time he came into power, right? Antiochus the Great. Now this is the father. Antiochus the Great is the father of Antiochus Epiphanes. So before Antiochus Epiphanes came into power, this was his father, right? This was before you hear about Antiochus Epiphanes, you got to hear about Antiochus the Great, because when you read the book of First Maccabees, chapter 1, let's go to that real fast. First Maccabees, chapter 1. In verse 1. All right, let's go to I want to get straight to the point. Yeah. This is First Maccabees 1 and 10. And it says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes. So this is before Antiochus came on scene. It says, son of Antiochus the king. So now we're going into that same king that is talking about in First Maccabees 1 and 10, Antiochus the king. It's the same person right here, right? Antiochus the Great or Antiochus the Third. So all right, so this is him being in rulership, right? It says of the Seleucid Empire decided to exploit the weakness of the young king by taking Ptolemaic territory for themselves. They signed a secret pact defining spheres of interest of opening the Fifth Syrian War. Philip first turned his attention to the independent Greek states in Thrace and near the Dardanelles. Right, his success at taking cities such as Chios worried the state of Rhodes and King Attalus of Pergamon. Right, who I mentioned Alexander earlier, but I wasn't trying to mention Alexander. I was trying to go into Antiochus, but it's lucky about that. But it says who also had interest in the interest in the area, Asia Minor, besieging the Ptolemaic city of Samos and capturing Miletus again. This concerted Rhodes and Attalus, and Philip responded by ravaging Attalus territory and destroying the temples outside the walls of Pergamon. Philip then invaded Caria, but the Rhodians and the Pergamanians successfully blockaded his fleet and Bargilia, forcing him to spend the winter with his army in a country which offered very few provisions. So now you're going to keep, as we keep reading, you're going to see it mentions the Second Punic War, the Macedonian War. We already talked about the First Macedonian War, so we're going to keep jumping down because we don't want to go back over that. We're going to keep moving, right? So we're going to go into where it says Rome enters the war, right? So it said this. On March 15, 200 BC, new consuls Publius Sulpicius Galba and Gaius Aurelius Cato took office in Rome in light of reports from Lavinus and further embassies of Pergamon, Rhodes, and Athens. the task of dealing with the troubles in Macedonia was allotted to Sapius. He called an assembly of the Comitia Centuriata, the body with the legal power to make the declarations of war. Right? It says the Comitia nearly unanimously rejected his proposed war and unprecedented act, which was attributed of war weariness. At a second session, Sapius convinced the Comitia to vote for war. Sapius recruited troops and departed to Brunduism in the autumn, where he added veterans of the Second Punic War who had just returned from Africa to his forces. Then he crossed the Adriatic, landing troops in Apollonia and stationing a navy in Corcyra. So now we go into all these different people again. A lot of war was going on to this time. So before the Romans could fully come into power, there were many wars that had to happen. There was a lot of war that had to happen. And now we're reading about all these different wars going on, all these different people that's involved. You got Antiochus' father, was Antiochus Epiphanes. His father was involved, right, in a part of all these things. Right, not only that, you had Philip. Right, you got this man Supplius, whatever you want to call his name. Right, so here, right, you got Sulpius and Villius campaigns. So, right, so you got 200 and 199 BC, and here you see right here, this was his. These were the different wars, right? The different battles they got into, right? This is Macedonians. This is the Illyrians, where we touched on them, reading about them. So you have the Macedonians right here, right? Macedonia. You got the Aegean Sea right here, and this is all that region right here where the Romans dwell, right? So they had war over here. They had war over here, right? So let's stop that. So, all right, now we going into the Roman naval campaign, right? The Aetolian campaign. So at this time, right, the Aetolians are still in the fight as well, right? At the same time of this land campaign set out, the Roman fleet had left Corcyra under command of Lucius Apostolius, rounded Cape Malea, and rendezvous with King Attalus near Hamon. The combined fleet then launched an assault on the Macedonian military base on the island of Andros and seized it for Pergamon. The fleet was joined by further ships from Issa and Rhodes and headed north to the Chalkide Peninsula, where an assault on Cassandria was a complete failure. So now you got so then again you still have it was more than two campaigns where the Romans were going to war with the Macedonians. Okay, so let's kind of jump down, right? Let's jump down to this. It says this. We're gonna jump down to this. It says, in Asia Minor, Pergamon was invaded by Seleucid king Antiochus III. As a result, Attalus was not able to assist, right, in naval war in the Aegean until a Roman embassy forced Antiochus to withdraw. So what is it talking about when it forced Antiochus to withdraw? That's when you go back here and you read about this, right? What we read again says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, the son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome. So when you go into them being a hostage at Rome, why was he a hostage at Rome? Why? Because his dad, right, which be Antiochus the Great, right? I'm gonna just go to it. We're gonna go to it, right? He got in battle with the Romans, and he had to withdraw. Right? It says Antiochus the Great, and this is going into why he was a hostage in Rome. Right? Antiochus the Great, born 242 BC, died in 187. was Seleucid king of the Hellenistic Syrian Empire from 223 BC and to 187, who rebuilt the empire in the east but failed in his attempt to challenge Roman ascendancy in Europe and in Asia Minor. He reformed the empire administratively by reducing the provinces in size, established a ruler cult with himself and his consort Laidos as divine, and improve relations with neighboring countries by giving his daughters in marriage to their princes. So because when he challenged the Romans and he fell short, that's why you have, when it mentioned the first Maccabees, that Antiochus was a hostage to Rome. Right? Let's go to that. Right? It said this goes into the early career of Antiochus, right? It says Antiochus, or Antiochus, how you want to pronounce his name, was the third son of Antiochus the Third the Great. After his father's defeat by the Romans in 190 to 189, he served as a hostage for his father in Rome from 189 to 175, where he learned to admire Roman institutions and policies. His brother King Seleucus, right, exchanged him for Demetrius, right? And then that's when you go into, you gotta remember when we was talking last week, we talked about also briefly about how when it came to the Grecians, when it started off with Alexander the Great, right? He started off that empire and he got that empire from his father, right? And when he got into power, he had such a vast empire. When it fell, it was broken up into four provinces, right? Which would be the Diadici, his four generals, right, that he had, right? And they broke up and they all had their own land, right? Now we're going into the Seleucid Empire, right? And understanding why this is all a part of Rome coming into power. Because at first, before Rome came into power, right, you still had Greek before Roman came into power, you had the Grecians constantly going to war with them. And one of the Grecians that went to war with them was Antiochus the Great, right? Which was Antiochus Epiphanes' father, right? And that's why when you see in the scriptures, right, where it mentions him being a hostage in Rome, that's why, because his dad lost took defeat to the Romans in 190 to 189 BC. Okay, so let's go back to our list here. My bad. So let's go back to our list of wars. Right. So we got the Roman Seleucid War. Right. We got the Roman Seleucid War. Now let's get into these things. The Roman Seleucid War. Hold on. Okay. Good. Right. So the Roman Seleucid War. So you got the Roman Seleucid War, also called the Attilian War or the Antiochian War, the Syrian War, and Syrian with Attilian War was a military conflict between two coalitions, one led by the Roman Republic, the other led by Seleucid King Antiochus III. Right, so this is again, it's Antiochus Epiphanes' father. Okay. The fighting took place in modern-day southern mainland Greece, the Aegean Sea, and Asia Minor. The war was the consequence of Cold War between both powers, which had started in 196 BC. In this period, the Romans and the Seleucids attempted to settle spheres. So I want to show this too, so y'all can get a visual of the Seleucid Empire, right? Let's get this right quick. So let's get the Seleucid Empire, so y'all can kind of see what was going on, right? So this is the Seleucid Empire, right? In this region right here, you have a Seleucid Empire, right? And then you have the Ptolemaic Empire right there, right? And then over here in this region, right, you got Athens with Rome and things like that over here in this little area right here, right? So they was constantly trying to the Seleucid Empire was constantly trying to expand, right? The Greeks for a long time wanted to overtake the Romans, right? And they ain't nothing but they both Edomites, right? But that's a part of their thing. They have that warlike spirit, and they get that from their great granddaddy, right? Esau. Right? They all Edomites. So hold on, let me get this precept right quick. So let's go to Genesis chapter 27. And let's go down to let's go to this right quick. Let's go to Genesis 27. Hold on, let me go make sure my screen is sharing. I want to show you something. So as you see, when you go to the so-called white man coming to power, the Romans coming to power, it's nothing but Edomites overtaking other Edomite territory. That's all that was going on, right? But before the white man, when the white man came to power, if it's like saying this. If the Grecians in power when the Grecians was in power, the so-called white man was in power, right? When the Romans, which overtake the Grecians, same thing. The so-called white man is in power. But now you're seeing the totality of where he's really his kingdom finna vastly accelerate, right? Because after the Romans took over, they're still in rulership to this day, right? They just follow in different names, right? They just got different names, right? So it says, let's get this. Let's go to Genesis 27:39. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above, and by thy sword shalt thou live. Right? So let's think about that. It says, By thy sword shalt thou live. And when you go into the background of the history of the Grecians, the Romans, right, all these Edomite nations, they've been constantly at war. That's how they gain their provinces. That's how they come into power, going to war. And they're hella good at it. And they've been doing it for centuries. This same blessing that Isaac said that he gave to Esau, right? You see it through his rulership. You see how he lives, right? Going into them constantly being at war, right? Even when they want peace, they go to war, and they still have that same spirit on them till this day, right? So now I just want to kind of bring that out, right? So kind of show y'all too, give y'all visual of the Seleucid Empire, what we're talking about, and who was involved in. So let's go back to the Roman Seleucid War. Right, and these again are Greeks. These are Greeks, okay? Let's keep that in mind. So let's jump down to this paragraph right here. After the Antiochian League triggered a small war which drew in Antiochus, Rome and the Seleucians came to blows. Antiochus landed in Greece but was forced to retreat across the Aegean Sea after being defeated at the Battle of Thermopylae, right, by the consul of 191 BC. So it was the Battle of Thermopylae where Antiochus the third or the Great was defeated by the Romans, right? Well, that's where he took a major blow. He took a major blow when he was defeated, right, at the Battle of Thermopylae. But he was still in the picture. But that battle was a major blow, right, to his to the Seleucid Empire, right? The Antiochians, attempted to reach a settlement with the Romans, but were unsuccessful. In the face of excessive Roman demands, Antiochus' naval forces in the Aegean were defeated in two major engagements, which saw the Roman coalition gain naval superiority. The Council of 190 BC, right? Lucius Cornelius Scipio, this guy, then pursued Antiochus into Asia Minor with the support of the Pergamene king Eumenes II, right? So you got all these different things going on, right? So now we going into the downfall, right? Now we seeing the Grecians starting to take a loss, right? They going to these retreats, right? They getting forced to retreat. So it says Antiochus started peace negotiations. So that at this point he was getting his behind wheels. So he's like, hey man, we gotta establish peace, which he broke after exorbitant Roman demands, but after he was defeated. And that's the nature of Esau. They have the peace negotiations. They had peace negotiations with the Native Americans. They ain't never killed one, right? But after he was defeated by the Roman-led coalition of the Battle of Magnesia, so you had the Battle of Magnesia, and that's when you see when it was going into how he was defeated, when it says from 190 BC to 189 BC. That was the Battle of Magnesia, right? Which says he sued for peace, accepting those Roman demands. So now you see Antiochus, right, the third, the great, he's taking the L, right? So and after this end up happening, right, you're gonna start hearing about Antiochus Epiphanes coming into play, right? So let's go back. Let's keep going. So let's go back to Daniel. I mean, not that Daniel. Let's go Daniel chapter 7, right? But before we get into this, we're gonna read Daniel chapter 7, but we gotta get the history on all of it. It says this Daniel chapter 7, this is correlation to what? Daniel chapter 2, right? Verse number 40, right? Let's go to this. Same thing. The Roman Empire. After this, I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, right? And it had great iron teeth, and it devoured and brake in pieces. So we have to get the history on how we know it says dreadful and beast. So this beast, right, overcame the leopard, right? We overcame because think about it, the leopard overcame the bear, right? The bear overcame the lion with the eagle's wings. Right now we go into this great and terrible empire, the Roman Empire. But before we can dive into how great to find out how great and terrible it was, or to find out how it devoured and broke in pieces, what did it break in pieces? It broke in pieces other nations. That's how it came into power. That's how it was able to devour. That's why it was considered terrible and dreadful. In order for us to understand why it was considered terrible and dreadful, we got to go into the history and show all these wars that the Romans were involved in before they came into power, right? And then you fully understand how it got the title of being dreadful and terrible, right? So we was covering, right, the Romans, the Seleucid War, right? So let's stop there. Let's go back to our key things. So, right. So around this time, right, you got this is going into the Macedonian Wars, right? We're still dealing with the Macedonian Wars, right now, the pinnacle thing that I want to bring out in the midst of the Macedonian Wars and what it's about to come into, right? And I'm gonna bring it out once it come into play, because it's going to go into another thing that involves, right, the Israelites, us. So before I get that, let's finish on where we was at dealing with these wars, right? Where we was at dealing with these wars. So you got the third Macedonian War. So now this third Macedonian War, I want to kind of hold on. Let's go crazy. So you got the third Macedonian War. So around this time, right? Let's read this right quick. It says, so before we get into the third Macedonian War, I want to show something that happened around this time period of this happening, scripture wise. So let's go down to this. What I got? Oh yeah, right there. Right. Oh yeah, this gonna tie to I had to check. So now we gonna dive into we gonna read this third war, but coming upon this third Macedonian war, you're gonna get we're gonna go into the Jewish, right, or they call the Jewish, but the Roman Jewish treaty, right? The Roman Jewish treaty, which comes into the first Maccabees chapter 8. But before we jump the gun in that, let's keep going with these wars, right? Let's keep going with these wars. And we're almost there. Because I want to touch on the treaty between the Israelites and the Romans. Right? It's all these things play a part. It says the third Macedonian War was a war fought between the Roman Republic and King Perseus of Macedon, right? In 179 BC, King Philip of Macedon was unalive and was succeeded by his ambitious son Perseus, who was anti-Roman and stirred up anti-Roman feelings around Macedonia. Right, in 172 BC, a Roman commission visited Perseus and required of him concessions, which meant the extinction of his independence upon his refusal to comply with demands. They returned home and Rome declared war. So now we going into this third one now. So they had a lot of wars against the again, and the Macedonians, they Grecians, right? It says most of the war was fought in Macedon as well as neighboring Thessaly, right, which is a region in Greece, right, where the Roman troops were stationed after an inconclusive battle in Kallinikis in 171 BC. In several years of campaigning, Rome decisively defeated the Macedonian forces at the Battle of Pydna, right? So you got the Battle of Pydna, and all this what you got going on, right? Is during the Hellenistic period, right? During the Hellenistic period, when you had all the Israelites was in this under the thumb of the so-called white man, right? All these things going on, right? You had these different wars that was going on between the Grecians and the Romans, right? And while we was catching hell on our end, being Hellenized and all this and that, right? You had the Romans going to war, right, with the Grecians. Right, so it says the Battle of Pydna took place in 168 BC between Rome and Macedon during the Third Macedonian War. The battle saw the further ascendancy of Rome in the Hellenistic world, right? All that freakism they had going on during that time, right? Exercising, but men exercising naked, right? They was forcing our people to eat swine's flesh, serve their gods. A lot of wickedness was going on when you read the book of Maccabees. You see those things, and that's what you call the Hellenistic period. in the end of the, and they ain't got to think about too. Not only that, the Hellenistic period, a lot of the so-called white man was at the height of his wickedness. There was a lot of wickedness going on, a lot of freakism going on, and a lot of the different pagan holidays and things they got now. They, a lot of them, all them freak offs, they started in the Hellenistic period, right? But it says whose power traced back to Alexander the Great. The battle is also considered to be a victory of the Romans' legions, a manifold system's flexibility over the Macedonians' phalanx or rigidity. So this was a big battle, right? It was a big, very big and important battle, right? So that's that. That's the battle of Pydna. Now this is a very it's a chief battle, a part of the Third Macedonian War. Remember, there were several wars. The Grecians and the Romans were constantly going at it, right? Rome's victory ended in the Rome ended in the Antonine dynasty and brought an effective end to the independence of the Hellenistic kingdom of Macedon. Although formal annexation was some years away, the kingdom was divided into 4 client republics called the Merides, with capitals located in Amphipolis, Thessalonica, and you know that was a chief place of Greece. That's one of the places that what Paul traveled to, right? And there were some Israelites, of course, that he traveled there because there were some Israelites in that region, right? Which were members of the Federal League, the League of the Macedonians. Romans' prestige and authority in Greece greatly increased, right? So the Roman prestige and authority in Greece greatly increased. So now you see the Roman authority is growing, right? The Roman authority is growing. So we're not gonna backtrack because they're gonna give you a backdrop. We got that. We talked about that. We talked about the battle of Pydna, right? So let's go deal with the aftermath, right? But matter of fact, skipping the aftermath, let's get to the because there's a lot of reading. It's a lot of reading going to all these wars. So we're gonna go to the fourth war because we'll be here all night. We go to all these different points on it. I can't get it all, but I'm gonna go into the fourth war. So now, as we see it again, now this big battle of Pydna started the Roman more Roman authority or more Roman power in Greece, right? So right here you have the fourth war. Now we're gonna touch on the Jewish Roman treaty. Now this happened before the fourth war happened, right? Before the fourth war happened. Let's go to that. Let's read it first out the Bible, and then we're gonna get the history on that as well, right? So when you read book of First Maccabees chapter 8 and 1, it says, now Judas had heard of the Romans, that they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would loving accept all that joined themselves unto them, and make league of enmity with all that came unto them. So when he said he was hearing about them being valiant, that's what he was hearing about. He was hearing about the Macedonian wars. He heard about the Macedonian wars, the battle of Pydna. He heard about these things, how they overcame the Grecians. He's hearing about these things, right? That's when you see what he was hearing was what we was reading. And after that, they were men of great valor. It was told him also of their wars and noble acts. So we just went into their wars. Those different wars, we're still going into their wars, but he's hearing about the wars that we just went over. Judas Maccabees heard about the wars that we just went over, right? Which was the first down to the first Macedonian war down to the fourth, right? I mean the third, right? It says after they were men of great valor, it was told to him also their wars and noble acts which they had done among the Galatians, and how they had conquered them and brought them under tribute. So let's start right there. Let's start right there. And that's why you have, and that's why when you read about the Roman, that's why when you read about Romans being in Galatia, how do they become being in Galatia? Because they conquered the Galatians. Right? They conquered the Galatians. And that, Salakia. Let me put this on the screen for y'all so y'all can see. Now, when they conquered the Galatians, get that. Okay, there we go. Now, this is going to the Romans conquering the Galatians, right? It says the Roman conquest. Get it? It says the Galatian War, the war was fought in 189 BC between the Galatian Gauls and the Roman Republic, supported by their ally Pergamum. We read about Pergamum. The war was fought in Galatia in Central Asia Minor and present-day Turkey. The Romans had just defeated the Seleucids in the Roman Seleucid War. We was reading about this, and were in the midst of concluding a treaty with the latter. Right? So we were just reading about that. Right? So that's when you hear about the Romans overtaking the Galatian. That's why you have in Romans, fast forward in the time of Romans, you have Romans in the land of Galatia, right? Because the Romans had conquered that land. At one point in time, they did not dwell in that land, but because they conquered that land, thus you had those people dwelling in that land. I'm gonna read a little bit on this, and then we're gonna jump back. The Romans had then turned their attention towards the Gallic tribes of Galatia, who were known for making frequent raids into other cities in Asia Minor and possessing much loot. Ancient historians noted that Gaius Manlius Voso, the consul, had justified the invasion by saying that it was in retaliation for the Galatians supplying troops to the Seleucids during the war. So you had the Galatians were supporting the Seleucids during the war. So this is part of the reason why you also had the Romans doing what? Invading Galatia. Right? It all plays a part. It said this. Then that Voso had embarked on his campaign without the permission of the Roman Senate. However, modern historians argue that the war had either come. Oh, they talking about something else. We're gonna jump off on that. Right, matter of fact, Ricky said joined by troops from Pergam, the Romans marched inland, avoiding cities held by the Seleucids and attacking those that had not formally allied with the latter. Right, so they're attacking people that had not formally allied with the latter. So let's start right there. Now let's go back to that. So now we're seeing when the Galatians were overtaken by the Romans, right? And the reason why the Romans did that, right? And how they we're gonna continue from the top. It says, and that they were men of great valor. It was told him also of their wars and noble acts which they had done among the Galatians, and how they had conquered them and brought them under tribute, and what they had done in the country of Spain for the winning of the mines of the silver and gold which was there. Hold on now. Let's go to this now. As we read this stuff, we're going to be reading as we read on. We're going to be seeing a lot of things we just covered. A lot of things we covered, right? We're going to see. Let's go to this though. The Romans conquering Spain, right? Let's go into the Romans conquering Spain. So you can see, you're gonna see like everything that Judas was saying, what Judas was seeing, right? We're gonna see all these things, right? So let's go to this. The Romans, right? The Romans, this is when they had conquered Spain, right? And that's again why you sell the so-called white man in Spain as well, right? So let's go to this. The Roman Republic conquered and occupied territories in the Iberian Peninsula that were previously under the control of native Celtic, Iberian, Celtiberian, and Aquitanian tribes of the Carthaginian Empire, right? The Carthaginian Empire was North Africa, right? The Carthaginian territories in the south and east of the peninsula were conquered in 206 BC during the Second Punic War. So the control was gradually extended over most of the peninsula without annexations. It was completed after the end of the Roman Republic, 27 BC, by Augustus, the first Roman emperor, who annexed. So we is going into that, right? But this is the region, right here, right? It says Roman conquest. I'm gonna show this. Oh yeah, Roman conquest in provinces in Hispania beginning in 220 BC and ended with the Green Spain in 19 BC. So this is where they started at, right? They started over here, right? Because you got to remember, Carthage was down here. Carthage was down here, right? So now around this time in this region right here, you have on this side of the map, right? You have them conquering this area around 194 BC. 194 BC in this region right here, in this brownish area, to 123 BC. In this area right here, in this brownish area, they was conquering. That's also going into the different times. So you can see how vast the Roman Empire was to be going to war with the solutions, the Macedonians, and at the same time conquering all these other lands at the same time. Right, so they had a lot going on. And that's when you go back to this precept right here in the book of Daniel, right? We go to this. Let's go to Daniel again. Daniel chapter 7. And you read this, it says, after this, I saw night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And you see the might of the Romans. When you see how they're coming in power, right? How they're taking over all these different nations, right? How they took in the silver, gold, they took over the land of Galatia, right? They've been battling with the Macedonians, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and break in pieces. So it conquered Spain, right? It conquered the Carthage area. It conquered so many territories, right? And so that's when you go back to First Maccabees chapter 8, you're hearing about all these things, right? Let's read verse 4. It says, and that by their policy and patience, they had conquered all the place, though it were very far from them, Galatia. Look what Galatia is at. When you look at what Galatia is on the map. And the kings also that came against them from the uttermost part of the earth, till they had discomfited them and given them a great overthrow, so that the rest did give them tribute every year. Right now, we about to touch on what? Who we about to touch on? It says this. Beside this, how they discomfited in battle Philip and Perseus, king of the Sinners. We was just reading about that. Right? We was just reading about that in the what? let's just briefly just go back to, you see how all these different wars, all these different Macedonian wars, how they all connected together, right? Let's go back. Matter of fact, I think it's in this one. Yes, in the Second Macedonian War, you hear about them, right? You hear about them defeating Philip, right? You hear about Perseus coming into play. You hear about these men coming into play, right? So this whole time, Judas Maccabees is getting all this information that we going through right now. Judas information got all that information. Like how we going in and we saying, this is Philip, you see right here where it mentions, right, what? We hear how we see how Perseus came into play, right? Was a king of ancient Perseus, right here. We was just reading about Perseus, right? What did it say here? It says Perseus was the king of ancient Greece. So he came into play during the second Macedonian War, right? But let's read. He came into play around the Second Macedonian War, because that's where it's reading it, right? It says king of ancient Greek, kingdom of Macedon, from 179 BC, 79 until 168 BC. He is widely regarded as the last king of Macedonia and the last ruler of the Antigonic dynasty, right? Antigonic dynasty. In his defeat by Rome at the Battle of Pydna. We just was talking about the Battle of Pydna, right? During the what? The Third Macedonian War. So when you read about all these things going on in First Maccabees chapter 8, where he's going into all these different things, that these mighty things that the Romans had did, we went through those things throughout history, right? We went through those things in history, how they went from the First Macedonian War to the second one to the third one, right? And we about to jump into the fourth one, right? So it says this, right? It says how also Antiochus, the great king of Asia, right, that came against them in battle, having 120 elephants with horsemen. We hold on. We gotta hold on. We gotta hold on before we jump into that, right? So let's start right. Hold on, I was sharing it. So let's start right there, right? So let's now who this talking about right here, right? Let's go to this, right? Let's get into this thing, man. Right, so let's go to this. Stop. All right. Let me get this. My bad. My tabs was messing up on me. All right. So let's go into this. It says now we're going to Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Antiochus Epiphanes, right? So let's just read about this, right? We kind of touched on his dad, right? How he was a hostage in Rome, right? Which was in First Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 10, right? So now we're just gonna go into these different this. I want to kind of get a specific thing. All right, I want to look for something very specific that I had. Right. Now let's go to this. It says, in the winter of 169, 168, Perseus, a Macedonian, in vain begged Antiochus to join forces with him against the danger that Rome presented to all the Hellenistic monarchs. Right. So here you have it. Right. Perseus, which we just was mentioned, right, in First Maccabees chapter 8, he's trying to get in league with Antiochus, right? It says in Egypt, Ptolemy made common cause with his brother and sister and sent a renewed request to Rome for aid, and until Antiochus prepared for battle, the fleet, right, of Antiochus won a victory at Cyprus, right, whose governor surrendered the island. Hold on, let's stop right there. Let's stop right there. Let's go to this. Let's go to this. Let's go this right quick. Let's get this right here. And so we can see all these things getting tied, all these different wars getting tied into place, right? All these wars getting tied into place. All right, let's go to 2 Maccabees chapter 5. And about the same time, Antiochus prepared a second voyage into Egypt, right? So now you're hearing about Antiochus trying to go into Egypt. Let's jump down, right? Well, first, let's keep reading. It says, and when it happened that through all the city, for a space almost of 40 days, there were seen horsemen running in the air and cloth of gold and armed lances like a band of soldiers and troops of horsemen in array, encountering and running one against another with shaking shields and multitude of pikes and drawing swords and casting of darts and glittering of golden ornaments and harness of all sorts. Wherefore every man prayed that the apparition might turn to good. Now that's the point. Now when there were going forth a false rumor as though Antiochus had been dead, Jason took at least 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city, and they that were upon the walls being put back. I want to jump down. Let's go down to here. This I want. It says this. Howbeit of all this he obtained not the principality, but at the last received shame for the reward of his treason, and fled again to the country of the Ammonites. In the end, therefore, he had an unhappy return, being accused before Aretas, the king of the Arabians, fleeing from city to city, pursued of all men. So like that's not what I was looking for. No. There we go. This is what I want. This is what I want right here. This is what I want right here. It's like it. Let's jump to verse 21. It says, so when Antiochus had carried out of the temple 1,800 talents, he departed in all haste to Antiochia, weening in his pride to make the land navigable and the sea passable by foot. Such was the haughtiness of his mind, and left governors to vex the nation at Jerusalem, Philip for his country, and Phrygian, and for many manners more barbarous than he that set them there, and in Garazim, Adronicus, and besides Menelaus, who was worse than the rest, bare and heavy hand over the citizens, having malicious mind against the countrymen of the Jews. So you have again, this is Antiochus. He in the picture, right? And he's traveling from Egypt and this and that, and he's taking money to Antiochia, right? He says he left his governors to vex our nation as Jerusalem, Philip for his country country of Phrygian, right? Let's go to the Phrygian people, because we was just talking about them. Let's get to this guy. So this is the Philip that he's talking about, that he had, that Antiochus had set up, right? So hold on, let me make sure y'all can see this joint. Like it. Cheering. There we go. All right. So now y'all can see it. Let's see. All right. This is Philip the Phrygian that it was just talking about, right? That same Philip, right? Let's read right here. It says, same dude that he had set up over Jerusalem. It says, after the murder of Seleucus, right? 6 and 94 BC, Philip the first became king with his twin Antiochus, right? Epiphanes, and planned to avenge Seleucus in the in 93. So this kind of jumping ahead a little bit, right? It's kind of jumping ahead, but I just wanted y'all to see, right? I'm gonna just keep reading, but I'm gonna show you how, like, it was how Philip the Phrygian was involved, right? Because again, you gotta remember too that the Romans and the Grecians, right? They've been at war for a long time. Cause this ain't the only war that they've been in. We still got more wars that we gotta go to. But I did want to kind of jump ahead a little bit of myself. But I want to just I'm gonna keep reading now. It says, and planned to avenge Seleucus in the 93 BC. Antiochus took Antioch from Antiochus' son. Antiochus became the senior king, and Philip remained in the base in Sicilia. Antiochus' ex returned and killed Antiochus. That year, Philip then allied with his younger brother Demetrius, right, who was based in Damascus, right? And so all these different things, all these different people, right, and all this time period was around this time period right here. But we don't want to skip just too far ahead like I did, because I did want to mention before we get into that, right, I did want to continue on with those wars, right? But I did want to kind of show y'all how, like, in Second Maccabees, how all these, I mean, not second, but First and Second Maccabees, the same people that you hear about in First and Second Maccabees, these are the same people, right, that we've been doing all this history on. The same people been doing all this history on. So let's go back. All right. We was at right, so it says this. Let's jump down to here. It says First Maccabees 8 and 8. It said, in the country of India and Medea and Lydia, and of the goodliest countries which they took of him, and gave King Eumenes. Right. Moreover, how the Grecians had determined to come to destroy them. So there has always been some rivalry between the Grecians and the Romans. Well, not always. At one point in time, they had tried to seek peace as well. But before I get back to the wars, I did want to show y'all this this right here. Let's go to jump down 19. Cause I did want to show y'all the treaty between the Jews and the Romans that happened in 161 BC. They went therefore to Rome, which was a very great journey, and came into the Senate, where they spake and said, Judas Maccabees with his brethren and the people of the Jews have sent us unto you to make a confederacy and peace with you, that we might be registered your confederates and friends. So what you read about right here in verse 20 is what you call the Roman and Jewish treaty. So let's go back to where I had, right here. So this is the Roman Jewish treaty. The covenant between the Jews in Romans, particularly the Roman Jewish treaty, established a framework of mutual support and defense, marking a significant moment in Jewish history during the Maccabean revolt. The Roman Jewish treaty, established around 161 BC, was a significant agreement between Judas Maccabees, right, we're just reading about, right, in the Roman Republic. This treaty was the first recorded contract between Judea and Rome. And it's so crazy, bro. The same people same people they had they said it was a recorded contract. Same people ransacked Jerusalem. Same people that they say what? We gonna have a treaty with them. They ransacked our people, right? Sought to unalive a lot of our people, and they did. It says, and that goes into, let me get this. Hold on, let's keep reading. It says, this treaty was the first recorded contract between Judea and Rome, aimed at forming an alliance during the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire. So you had the Jews, right, coming together, us, the so-called blacks, the Spanish Native Americans come together, right? The Israelites come together, making a pact with the Romans to do what? Take down the Seleucid Empire. So we also the Israelites also played in a part in their downfall, in the Grecians' downfall, in the Romans' upbringing, right? It says the treaty included provisions for mutual defense, stating that if either party was attacked, the other would come to their aid. It also included clauses that prohibited both parties from supplying arms or support to each other's enemies, right? So it was a lot going on, right? A lot going on, right? So, man, and then it's so crazy. You had the Greco Roman wars. Then you end up fast forward in time going to the Roman Jewish wars, right? It's so crazy, but that's the Bible though. That's history. That's what happened, right? So in Romans, not Romans, but in First Maccabees chapter 8, you hear about the Jewish treaty war. So that played a part in the downfall of the Seleucid Empire, right? So let's kind of jump around this thing, and then we're gonna go back to the I'm gonna read this so y'all can see the same thing that it was just reading about in the article. It just says right here in the Bible. It says, in the same manner also, if war come first upon the nation of the Jews, the Romans shall help them with all their heart, according as the time shall be appointed them. Neither shall victuals be given to them to take a part against them, or weapons, or money, or ships, as it have seemed good to the Romans, but they shall keep their covenants, and that without deceit. Right. And man, it's crazy because before we're gonna start right here, right? We gonna keep going on this. We finna go right back to the wars, right? But it says without deceit, and we know these people came with deceit, man. We know these people came with beguilement, right? And there's nothing new under the sun. So let's go back to the war. So we touched on the first, the pirate. We started with the pirate. We did the first Macedonian War, the second Macedonian War, the third Macedonian War. Now we're going to the fourth Macedonian War, right? And that was the one that you hear about. You hear about the third Macedonian War in First Maccabees chapter 8, right? And we were just talking about the last Macedonian king, Antigonid, the Antigonid dynasty, which was Perseus, right? The last All right, let's start here. The Fourth Macedonian War, 150 to 148 BC, was fought between Macedon, led by the pretender Odriscus, and the Roman Republic. It was the last Macedonian Wars. So this is the last of the Macedonian Wars, and was the last war to seriously threaten Roman control of Greece until the first Mithridatic War 60 years later. I mean, 60 years later. The last Macedonian. I don't want to. If I jump into the missing the Mithridatic War, that's gonna jump us ahead of time. That's gonna jump us up 60 years. We got to keep going. The last Macedonian king of the Tigran dynasty, Perseus, had been defeated and dethroned by the Romans in the Third Macedonian War in 168 BC. In the aftermath of the war, Rome took indirect control of the region through the system of client states and imposed harsh terms to prevent Macedon from becoming a powerful state again. This system was successfully in maintaining Roman hegemony for nearly 2 decades, but broke down when Andricus, a Greek who bore a resemblance to Perseus, claimed to be the former king's son and established the Macedonian kingdom with Thracian troops. Andriscus was initially successful, defeating Roman clients and the Roman army sent to stop him and conquering much of Thessaly. However, he was eventually defeated by another Roman army under Quintus Cilius Metellus II, the second battle of Pydna. So this was so you had two Pydna battles, and this is the second one in 148, right? And this is where the Romans end up coming on top again, severely weakening his position. He was subsequently pursued and eventually betrayed to the Romans after settling a few subsequent minor rebellions. Rome took direct control of Macedon, making it a Roman province. So boom. Now you got the fourth one, the fourth Macedonian, the first Macedonian War. That's why it's the last one, because at this time, that's when Rome took control over Macedon. Right? That's what happened. So you hear about Andricus' throne, right? Andricus' conquest of Macedon, right? Roman involvement, Delna's defeat, right? Metellus' campaign, the second battle of Pydna, right? So let's jump down to this. It says the battle shattered Andriscus' army and broke the Macedonian war effort. He fled to Thrace and began raising another army there, but Metellus pursued him swiftly, forcing Andriscus into a new battle before his raw levies were fully prepared. This engagement was an easy victory for the Romans. As soon as the Macedonian front ranks were broken, the rest of the army fled in panic. Andriscus himself fled to Thracian princeling Byzes, but Metellus managed to persuade the latter to become a Roman ally and hand Andriscus over, concluding the campaign. And that goes into what we was just talking about, right? How he was, Andriscus was betrayed, right? So let's go to hold on. Let's go to this. Let's go to this story right quick. So I got some more stuff, right? So we touched on that. Let's go into the let's go to this right here. Let's go to this next war. I found this. Okay. So you got the Achaean War. Right now, this is going to the Battle of Corinth. So now you're going to learn how there was Romans in Corinth, right? This is going to the Battle of Corinth, right? There's a lot going on. And this happened in 146 BC. It says the Achaean War of 146 BC was fought between the Roman Republic and the Greek Achaean League, an alliance of Achaean and other Peloponnesian states in ancient Greece. It was the final stage of Rome's conquest of mainland Greece, taking place just after the Fourth Macedonian War. Rome and Achaea had been allies since the Second Macedonian War, 50 years prior, but tensions between the two polities had been building up over the previous few decades, primarily over Roman efforts to throttle Achaean regional ambitions, particularly the long desired assimilation of Sparta into the League and the taking of large numbers of Achaean hostages by Rome in the aftermath of the Third Macedonian War. Tensions rose dramatically in 148 BC when the Achaea defeated and finally subjugated Sparta. In the aftermath of this, Rome tried to cow the League into halting its expansionist ambitions, but the failure of diplomacy between the two sides led to war. Rome swiftly defeated the League's main force near Scarphia before advancing to the League's capital of Corinth, where they defeated the remnants of the Achaean forces outside the walls, then brutally sacked the city. The same year which they destroyed Carthage, the war marked the beginning of direct Roman control of Greece and the end of the Greek independence, as well as the beginning of the end of the Hellenistic period. It is also noted for its significant cultural impact on Rome. The preponderance of Greek art, culture, and slaves in the aftermath of the conquest accelerated the development of Greco-Roman culture. So the battle at Corinth was the camel that broke the it was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. And now we're reading about, right, how the Battle of Corinth, it was that significant battle that brought the Roman in control. So now you see them in full control over the Grecians, right? So now it's giving you a whole background, right? So now we gotta deal with some things, because now it's about to come into now we about to start talking about these Caesars and things like that, right? We're gonna get into that, right? All this stuff, a lot of good stuff, right? Right. So the first, maybe we had read about that earlier, right? The first Mithridatic War. Now we're gonna get into this, right? The first Mithridatic War. Okay. The first Mithridatic War, right, in 89 to 85 BC, was a large conflict in Anatolia in ancient Greece that opposed the Roman Republic and the Pontic Kingdom ruled by Mithridates Eupator. Although the Roman general Sulla was largely victorious on the battlefield, factional struggle in Rome forced him to end the war on a precarious stalemate. Right, the war began after more than a decade of geopolitical maneuvering by the Mithridates, who managed to considerably extend his realm despite constant Roman attempts to restrain him. In 90 BC, the Roman delegation headed by Manius Aquilus provoked Mithridates to war. As Aquilus hoped to receive his command, the following year, Mithridates rapidly captured the Roman province in Asia, exploiting local resentment of Roman tax collectors to massacre the Roman settlers. So that again, when you hear about these different like Galatians, when you hear about the Romans being in Galatians, that's how you hear, right, that you have Roman settlers, they left Rome and they moved to different places, such as Galatia, right? And that's where you had some Israelites, right, in Galatia. But you see, they left their homeland and they did it. Esau do that. Same thing they did with America, right? They left Great Britain, they came over here. You know what I'm saying? So it's like they always have a habit of doing that. But that goes back to what we brought out in the Genesis, right? Esau being blessed with that sword. Right, let's get that again. So we seeing now at this time, ain't no nation really standing up against them. At this time, there is no other nation really standing up. Right? They was in power, and the only people and the other people that was getting power was them. When you look at it in a total, it's like it's Esau against Esau. So regardless, they still on top. They still the people in power. They're still the people in rulership. Well, even though they might be going to war with one another, they were still the ones that was in rulership at that time. Right? So let's read this again. It says, Genesis 27 and 40. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass when thou shalt have dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. So now we're going into Esau having dominion. We're going to Esau having a dominion. Because when we go back to, right, Daniel chapter 7, right, Rome and Greece, these are Edomite nations. So a part of Esau having dominion is him actually coming to rulership. But in order for him to come into rulership, he has to first defeat every nation. Every other nation that was at one point in time a powerhouse nation, they had to put these nations in subjection. And that's when you read Daniel chapter 7 and 7, when it says, after this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So we're gonna wait before we get to that part, right? But you're seeing the rise of this beast. You see how this thing is formulating, right? You see the rise of Esau, right? Under Roman rulership. Because we've seen his rise under the Grecian rulership. Right now we're seeing the rise of Esau in totality and having dominion under the Roman rulership, which was the greater of the Greece in the Roman. It was the greater, right? It had the longest kingdom, right? It had the longest rulership, right? Which still at the end of the day was still Esau, though. At the end of the day, right? So let's go back to where we was at these wars, right? We was at these wars. So we read about the Acrean War, right? So now we're gonna go into it's a lot of wars. So I'm gonna have to end up jumping on some of them, but for the sake of time, but I'm gonna get as much as I can out. So we read about the first Mithridatic War, right? So now we're gonna go to the second Mithridatic War, which ended with the Pontic victory. Right. The second Mithridatic War was one of the three wars fought between Pontus and the Roman Republic. This war was fought between King Mithridates of Pontus and the Roman general Lucius Licinius Marina. Right at the conclusion of the first Mithridatic, Lucius Cornelius Sulla had come to a hasty agreement with the Mithridates because Sulla had to return to Rome to deal with his political enemies. The peace treaty allowed the Mithridates to remain in control of his kingdom of Pontus, but he had to relinquish his claim of Asia Minor and respect pre-war borders. Marina, as his son's legate, was stationed in Asia as commander of two legions, formerly under the command of Gaius Flavius from Fimbria. From Appian's work on his war, the Mithridatic Wars, we can deduce that it was put in command over Phrygia, right, which had been annexed to the Attilic kingdom in 180 BC. And we read about that as well, right? We read about Phrygia as well, right? And that's what Philip was, right? And was reading Second Maccabees, right? Is it Second Maccabees, First Maccabees? Now, so we're gonna keep going. Like I said, we don't go too deep onto this war, but we see that there was a second one because we still got to cover some more wars. But we're gonna go to the third one. Go ahead, jump to there. Right, the third Mithridatic War, the last and longest of the three, was fought between Mithridates of Pontus and the Roman Republic. Both sides were joined by a great number of allies, dragging the entire east of the Mediterranean and large parts of Asia, Asia Minor, Greater Armenia, Northern Mesopotamia, and the Levant into war. What is Levant region? The Levant region is the Middle East, right? That is what they call the Middle East. But that's what Israel is. Israel is in the area of the Levant, right? So it says, into the war, the conflict ended in defeat of Mithridates. It ended the Pontic kingdom in the Seleucid Empire. By then, a rump state also resulted in the kingdom of Armenia becoming an allied client state of Rome, right? So hold on. So you got the third. You had the third Mithridates War, right? The third one, right? Now, to mine, I want y'all to know around this time that we going into this, around this time, this is way after the Hasmonean dynasty, right? This is after the Hasmonean dynasty. This is after the Maccabean revolt. This is after all of that, right? It's after all of that. This is fast forward, right? This fast forward in time, right? Again, we going into, if y'all want to go into the Maccabean revolt, y'all definitely can read that in First Maccabees and Second Maccabees, right? But we're going into the Rome, to the rise of Rome. So, and just want to keep that note. So brothers sisters might have a question. Well, where was we at this time? Like, we weren't in rulership. This was after the Maccabean revolt. Matter of fact, let's read. Let's see. Let me get something. Let me get something. Let's get something. So when we go into this, right? Matter of fact, we can correlate this time. So this will be around. This will be around the This will be after. This will be. You kind of mentioned. It mentions a little bit of some of these people. Actually, they don't. But the end of the Hasmonean dynasty, I'm gonna show y'all. So you got Simon here, right? Right. Remember Simon's, right? It does mention John. It mentions John Harkness. It mentions John Harkness. But then it started going to these different then you start going to Alexander Janus, right? Then you got going to you going to Salome and Alexandra, right? And this was a queen. And this wasn't even a I don't even think she was an Israelite, right? But you had Harkness, right? John Harkness II, Astribulus II. You got Harkness II. You got Antigonus, right? And this is when you got the when you actually go back on the history of this, you got some of the leaders of the Hasmonean dynasty started intermingling with the with Esau, right? You had what it is? I think it was the wife of it's either the wife of Alexander yeah, let me just go to the right here. Alexander Janus, right? Now this is the Israelite, right? It says what's it? It says was the second king. Alexander was the second king. So this round we was reading around those time periods, right? So he was a king around this time. It's 776 BC. So this is after the Maccabean revolt, but during the Hasmonean dynasty, right? The Hasmonean dynasty and the Maccabean revolt it's kind of the same thing because it's the same thing, but it's not, because the Maccabean revolt was between a certain time period, and the Hasmonean dynasty lasted for decades, if that makes sense. So the Maccabean revolt was a part of the Hasmonean dynasty, right? It's more so was a part of the Hasmonean dynasty. So during again, now you still, even though you might have had Judas and them, and then you still had our people in rulership, right? And all the while, our people in rulership, right? What we was just talking about in what was that? Hold on. Let me go back to that. All right. The third war, right? This is around 73 BC. 73 BC, the third Midratic war, 73 BC to 63 BC. This is who you had rulership, and on our end as the Israelites, right? On our end, historically wise, this is who you had in place. You had Alexander Janus, right? Right. So I'm gonna go just touch on this a little bit, so y'all can see in relation to as as you see the because Rome is still in power, right? Rome is still in power very much so, but you see what's going on our end historically, as in who was in rulership, as in dealing with our people, right? But I just want to touch on this briefly because I still want to focus on the rise of the Roman Empire. But you know what I'm saying? You had again, Alexander Janus was the second king of the Hasmonean dynasty, right? Who ruled over the expanding kingdom of Judea from 103 to 76 BC. A son of John Harkness, he inherited the throne from his brother Astribulus and married his brother's widow, Queen Solomon Alexandra. I want to deal with her. Let me see what she was a regent queen of Hasmon, Judea, one of only 3 women in Jewish historical tradition to rule over the country. Okay, she was. It wasn't her. It wasn't her, but one of our forefathers ended up dealing with a heathen woman, right? Let me see. It was one of them. I'm gonna get it. Matter of fact, let's get it, cause you had a Stribless, you had So she was married to a Stribless the first, right? So let's go back, and then she ended up marrying Alexander after Janus died, right? So let's go back. So let's go to Harkness, John Harkness the second. One of them did though. I'm trying. Let me see. Hold on. So let's see. It says, here we go. It might have been him. Right, yeah, here you go. It says, was one of the last scion of the Hasmonean royal house, brother of Herod the Great's. Wait, hold on, yeah, that's where it started kind of, when you start reading, you start seeing that Esau started to get involved in his, like, it says this. Let me see. What the hell? He said he was a brother of Herod the Great. What the heck? See, that's what we gotta backtrack. That was I'm like, what? I know I remember seeing this. So boom, here we go. Right? Is this is also known as Antigonus the Hasmonean. He was unalive in 37 BC, was the high priest of Israel and also the last Hasmonean king of Judea. Right? He was the son of King Astribilus the second of Judea. And in 37 BC, Herod handed him over to the Romans for execution. All right, that's what I'm like. Okay, there we go. So this is where they start. It gets shaky, right? It gets a little shaky, right? Because this will happen. It says, which led to the Jews' fierce struggle for independence against Rome. All right, so here we go. So this happened in 37 BC, right? 37 BC. He was handed over by Herod, right? Herod the Great. So, all right, it's crazy. Okay, so yeah, so we tracking, right? So that's when it end up they start fooling off with Esau down. You know, it's crazy, man. Yeah, heck yeah. Now this going to this wicked Edomite right here. Yeah. And it's all gonna come into play, right? But it says was a Roman, this is going to Herod, right? Was a Roman Jewish client, king of the Herodian kingdom of Judea, right? He is known for his colossal building projects. Among these works are the rebuilding of the second temple, right? So we gotta just want to kind of we gonna all see how this ties together. And this also and this so crazy. This is his name. This how you know this man is an Edomite. Born Idumea has Judea, right? This man, this man was an Edomite. And it's clear right there. That's clear right there. All right, so boom. So before we get there now, I just want to show y'all in relation to the time of you see all these wars going on, these Mithra's war, the third one, what was going on our side of the field. So that was going on. So let's go back, and it's gonna tie back into what we're going into right here. So all right, let's go back. What was that? So now we had this war right here, right? So we're gonna jump now. Now as we go into the Pontic War, we gonna remember those names that we now said we gonna remember those dates of those different kings that we had going on the Hasmonean dynasty, because you got the Hasmonean dynasty still well and thriving at this time, right? So it says the Pontic War of 48 to 47 BC was an armed conflict between Rome and the king of Bosporus and Pontus, Pharnaces II, who tried to restore the Mithrae's kingdom. The kingdom of Mithraeus. After the unaliving of Mithraeus, Pompey made his son Pharnaces king of Bosporus. Pharnaces was declared a friend of the Roman people and became a client of Pompey, but in civil war, he did not provide any help to him, taking a wait and see attitude in hope to take advantage of the internal struggle among the Romans and regain his father's kingdom. So that's you had that going on, right? So now you go into the war, right? There was war. Now it says belligerents. So you got the Roman Republic, you got Galatia, right? Now let's go to this. Let's keep going now. It's all coming to this thing. The War of Actium, right? The War of Actium. The War of Actium was the last civil war of the Roman Republic, fought between Mark Antony, assisted by Cleopatra, and by extension of Ptolemaic Egypt, because you still had the Ptolemaic Egypt going on, right? And Octavian, right? So he was the Augustus, right? Also known as Octavian, was the founder of the Roman Empire, right? So he was the first emperor, right? He was the first emperor. Augustus Gaius Octavius, right? This is when he was born. Also known as Octavian, was the founder of the Roman Empire, who reigned as the first Roman emperor from 27 BC until his unaliving in after death 14. The reign of Augustus initiated an emperor cult in an era of imperial peace, the Pax Romana or Pax Augusta, in which Roman world was largely free of armed conflict. The Principate of style of government where the emperor showed nominal difference to the Senate and was established during his reign and lasted until the crisis of the 3rd century, right? Octavian was born into the equestrian branch of the plebeian gens following the assassination of Julius Caesar. So you hear about Julius Caesar, right? Now we gotta get on Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar. So this is following the assassination of Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, right? And after him, that's when Octavian came into play, right? So Gaius Julius Caesar, right, was the Roman general and statesman, a member of the first triumvirate. Caesar led the Roman armies in the Gallic Wars, right? The Gallic Wars, which was between 58 to 50 BC, before the defeating of his political rival Pompey in the Civil War. We was reading about all those civil wars, and the last of the civil wars was the civil war, the War of Actium. He subsequently became dictator from 49 BC until his assassination in 44 BC. Caesar played a critical role in the events that led to the demise of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. So understand this: you had you got the Roman Republic, right? The Roman Republic, right? And then you got the Roman Empire, right? So you got the Roman Republic and you got the Roman Empire, right? Okay, so now at the end of the day, it's still Rome. You know what I'm saying? Just different names. right? So let's keep all these things in mind, right? So you got the Roman Empire, you got the Roman Republic, right? So right now we got the War of Actium. So the Roman Republic ended in 27 BC, right? So now we're going into the War of Actium, which was a 32 to 30 BC. So this is during the time the Roman Republic is still in power at this time, right? It's still in power at this time. So let's jump down. It says the war involved some of the largest Roman armies ever seen. Both Antony and Octavian's legions were experienced veterans of previous civil wars who had fought together, many also having once served under Julius Caesar. Right? We were just talking about Julius Caesar. The two did, however, raise their own legions separately. Following the end of the war, Octavian brought peace to the Roman state that had been plagued by a century of civil wars. Right? It's a century of civil wars, marking the beginning of the Pax Romana, a period of relative internal peace and stability. Octavian became the most powerful man in the Roman world, and the Senate bestowed upon him the honorific of Augustus in 27 BC. Octavian, now Augustus, became the first Roman emperor, and transformed the republic into the Roman Empire. So that's what happened. He transformed the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire, right? And you got to see this. Look how vast the Roman Empire thing was, yo. We got to see this, yo. Look at this. You know what I'm saying? So you got, man, it's all the way from over here. It was over here to here, right? They had a lot going on, right? They had a lot going on. Right? So let's stop sharing that. So let's go back. So now we're seeing how the Romans got this title of being the Romans coming into play and having this title of being that terrible beast, right? That terrible beast, right? So let's go back to the scriptures, right? Because we've been in well, first I got this video too, though. I got a video also going into something. Let me get that right quick. Let me get that. All right. Oh. All right. Let me see, make sure. All right, go bear with me. Okay, hold on, y'all. It's all good though. Ain't no pressure. I hate that. So, anyways, I had this video, which I'm just gonna pull it up. I'm just gonna pull it up. It's no biggie. Pull it up again. Satan, right? I don't know what happened to it, but it is what it is. And it's for this is fair use, fair use. Fair use. Fair use, man. I had a good video, man. Had it perfect where I wanted it. But it's all right. I'm gonna pull something else up. Satan ain't gonna stop this, man. So let me see. Let's go here. So again, this is fair use. Fair use again. Hope y'all able to hear it. Hope y'all able to hear it. What y'all able to hear it? I just want to kind of show y'all the dang, that ain't what I wanted, man. Dang, Satan, man. I had it pulled up though. And it is what it is, y'all. But it was a video basically just showing you, you know what I'm saying, going into the fall of the Roman Empire, right? And how it fell, the different things that was going on, right? One of the kings that they had in rulership at the time, and how his kingdom ended up falling or coming to an end. So it's all good though. We're gonna keep it pushing though. So the whole time though, right? Is you have the I'm gonna read this video out though by going into, because you also gotta understand too. It's for fair use. Fair use. You had the you have the Western, right? Hold on, let me show y'all this. You got the Western and Eastern Roman Empire, right? And they was going at it. And that's when you have these civil wars and things like that. Rome was having this infighting going on.
To naturally fragment.
This
And
fair
at
use, though.
times they try systems where they split it into four. So under Diocletian, he tries the tetrarchy, where he splits the empire into four, and you actually have sort of four emperors working together as a team. More commonly, it just splits east-west.
All right,
So from that point on, you really start.
So the most common date
hold
people
on.
say,
Before we get into the West,
maybe you can correct me on this, that the Roman Empire fell
they
is
trying to jump to
476.
something else, man. What we'll do is we're gonna come back to this video, because we gonna end up jumping ahead into this thing. So we gonna finish this. We actually finna go into the Romans after during the during and after the time of Yahweh, right? After and during the time of Yahweh. So now we finna get into that. So you had, this is we covered all the Roman Roman Greco wars, the Rome between the Greeks. Now at this time, right, the Romans, now they finna go into, now you gotta go into what? After the Roman and Greek wars, you had what? Then we're gonna get into the Western into the Western the Western Rome. So let's go to this right here. Now we're gonna go into the Roman Jewish wars, right? Well, now we have the Romans coming at the Israelites, right? So now we finna get this. All this is a part of the Romans coming into power, right? So let's go straight. Let's just dive straight into it, right? So we're gonna dive straight into it. So the Jewish Roman wars, because before you had the Romans Jewish wars, you had a whole bunch of emperors of Rome that were just coming in at a time period, right? I'm gonna show y'all what I'm talking about. So, right, you had these 12 Roman emperors that was coming in back. I mean, it was back to back. Emperors, yeah. Let me get this. So you had Claudius, you had Augustus. Remember we talked about Augustus. You had Nero, you had all them jokers, right? So the 12 Caesars, right? You had the 12 Caesars. So before we can go into that, because we gotta get all these things. You had the 12 Caesars too, right? So amongst having the 12 Caesars, right? So let's get this. So we got the 12 Caesars, right? Because the Roman Jewish wars started around 60 C, somewhere around that time, right? So before we get to jump straight to that, we got to get in between portion. So the in between portion to be understanding, okay, because we already covered the Greco-Roman era where they was going to war with the Grecians. That was done with the Axiom War. After that, that was it. That was finished. So now, what was going on during that time? Right? They had these different emperors in Rome. You had Julius Caesar. We read about Julius Caesar, right? We talked about Augustus, right? We talked about his name was Octavius, named Augustus, right? You after him, you had Tiberius, right? This right now, this was around the time, right, that Yahweh Shah was alive, right? So let me get this real quick. Let me get this really quick. All right, so you had Tiberius, right? And I would fact check it. I like to bring this out, right? Tiberius, the emperor alive during Jesus, Yahweh Shai, right? The emperor alive during Jesus was Tiberius Caesar. He ruled from AD 14 to AD 37 and was the second Roman emperor after Augustus, right? Tiberius was known for his cautious, reclusive style of governance, often relying on subordinates to manage distant provinces. He was not directly involved in the crucifixion of Yahweh Shai, but framed the political and judicial structures that led to it. Right? So this is now, and then that's when you see this picture, like, I mean, not this picture, but this precept right here. Let's get that. Let me show you this precept showing you, right? Let me make sure I spell that right. So, make sure I spell that. All right, so when you read this right here, Matthew 21, chapter 17, right? This when you go and you know that, hey, what? The Romans, right, was in rulership, right? They in rulership. This is how you know, too, and how they ruled over the region. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Right? But Yahweh Shah perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he said unto them, who is this image and subscription? Right? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then said he unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. So that's who was rulership. That's why we was what the Israelites were Jewish. The Jews were under tribute. The Jews were under tribute to the Romans, and they was paying taxes. They had to pay taxes to the Romans. That's what had to happen. So during the time of them paying taxes to the Romans and Yahweh Shah on the scene, this the season that you got on the scene during the time of Yahweh Shah, right? Which is Tiberius, right? Let's go back to that. We got time, so we got to keep in mind. So this was who was in play. Tiberius was in play. He wasn't to play during the time when Yahweh shot, right? So you had Tiberius, right? And that's what it's talking about, giving us season to Caesar. That's why you have the 12 Caesars. He was a Caesar, right? So you have Tiberius, right? Now after Tiberius, you got Caligula, right? So you got Caligula, right? So now you got Caligula, right? Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, also called Gaius Caligula, was Roman emperor from 8037 until his assassination in 41. He was the son of Roman general Germanicus and Augustus' granddaughter Agrippina the elder, members of the first ruling family of the Roman Empire, who was born 2 years before Tiberius became emperor. Right? Gaius accompanied his father and mother and siblings on campaign in Germania. At little more than 4 or 5 years old, he had been named Gaius Julius Caesar, but his father's soldiers affectionately nicknamed him Caligula, Little Boot. All right. So you got Tiberius. I mean, not Tiberius, but you got Caligula, right? Now he in play 41. Now we building up into the time of the Roman Jewish wars, right? The Roman Jewish wars. So now, finna get into Claudius, right? Finna get to Claudius. Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, right? Was an emperor ruling, Roman emperor ruling from AD 41 to 54. A member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Claudius was born to Drusus and Antonia Minor at Legundum in Roman Gaul, where his father was stationed as a military legate. He was the first Roman emperor to be born outside of Italy. So this is almost to the time, right, of the Roman Jewish wars, right? So now you got Nero. All right, now you got Nero. Now we'll go now, okay? You got Nero. All right, so now he's in this period around that time. He's around that time. All right, so you got Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, right, was the Roman emperor and the final emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, reigning from AD 54 to his death in AD 68. So now you're going into the time of the Roman Jewish wars. So this is kind of kicking it off, right? It says, I'm gonna jump down. During Nero's reign, the general Cabolo fought the Roman Parthian War of 58 to 63 and made peace with the hostile Parthian Empire. The Roman general Suetonius Paulinus quashed a major revolt in Britain led by Queen Boudica. The Bosporan kingdom was briefly annexed to the empire of the first Jewish Roman war began. Bam. So now you got the start of the Roman Jewish war, right? With Nero, right? And Galba is in Galba. He says Galba was the first emperor of the year of the 4 emperors, right? The book of Galba is short. He's short-lived, right? Short-lived guy, right? So let me see where I'm at time-wise. I'm going crazy. Okay. But yeah, so now all these things, you have all this history, right, going into, right, the rise of these different emperors, right? Then you got Otho, Vespasian, right? You got it, so forth and so forth, right? And then you got the Romans-Jewish wars, right? So it said the Romans-Jewish wars were a series. The Roman-Jewish wars were a series of large-scale revolts by the Jews of Judea against the Roman Empire between 66 to 135 CE. The conflict was driven by Jewish aspirations to restore the political independence lost when Rome conquered the Hasmonean kingdom and unfolded over three major uprisings. The first Jewish Roman War, 66 to 73, the Ghettos War, and the Bar Kokhba revolts, right? So things was kind of heating up. So forth and so forth, you go into the rise, and it comes back to this, right? And I want to keep going, but for the sake of time, I ain't gonna keep going. You know what I'm saying? But I am gonna read this again, right? It says, and it was a diverse. I'm gonna read it again. This Daniel 7:7. I saw in the night visions, right, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse of all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Right. So I'm gonna leave off with this. Right. That 10 horns is going into NATO, the EU, right? Right here. These were this right here, the original members of NATO, because it's more members now. You know what I'm saying? The EU, right? The EU got a whole bunch going on right now. But it was Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, United Kingdom, United States. Right. So they said these are found in 12. So these 10 horns, these 10 of these the original 10 of these, right? And their names, they be changing names, doing all, they be changing the members. They got so many members now, but I googled the first members, but they will make up the 10 horns. They would be the 10 horns, right? That's what they would be. Let's go down to right. It says, these great beasts, which are four kings, which shall rise out of the earth. So it's just not just saying just four kings, like just four people, right? Because there are multiple kings that played their part, right? But it just being rulers, you know what I'm saying? Rulers. In these nations, they're gonna be in rulership. So at the time, right, the EU, right, is a part of that fourth beast, right? It's a part of that fourth beast. And out of Rome came the NATO. What you see NATO today of the EU, that's what Rome come from. I mean, they came from Rome. Not that's what Rome come from. They came from Rome, right? They came from Rome. I consider and beheld, there came up among them another little horn. That little horn is America, right? But it's so much history that I want to just get into other different things. So we're gonna have to revisit this. Lord willing, I'll probably do a part 2, Lord willing, through the spirit, right? But I'm gonna get ready just to close out, right? Not to go too crazy with time, but Lord willing, that was edifying through the spirit. I want to give all honor and glory to Yahweh Hashem Yahushua. Be a brother and sister, a mighty Shalom. And if you keep in dedication, Lord willing, you have a beautiful feast dedication to the spirit. Shalom.